child's doll containing smuggled heroin unintentionally ends up in a blind woman's apartment, making her a target of a psychopath and two small-time conmen in Terence Young's 1967 thriller, Wait Until Dark. That's the movie we'll be digging into this week on Movie Bones. Now all the children have gone to bed, and we can talk.
I'm not a person that jumps too much at movies. I'm not a fan of. I'm not a fan of jump scares whatsoever. And I do feel like there's movies nowadays where you can kind of anticipate a jump scare happening.
Oh yeah.
When I watched this movie, I was not anticipating that scene. It actually got me.
Wait Until Dark. It's a film with Audrey Hepburn. She plays Susie Hendricks, a blind woman in New York City apartment who comes into the unwanted possession of a doll she doesn't know is stuffed with full of heroin. This is obviously a thriller film, and it's got one of those confined space type situations, kind of like 127 Hours, which is the guy who cut his own arm off to save his life because he was trapped by a boulder. Movies like that, and Phone Booth or Panic Room. So it's one of those really claustrophobic type thrillers, and I really enjoyed this one, Ryan. How about you?
I also really enjoyed it. I will have to say that for the audience out there that hears or that is listening to us right now, or whenever you're listening to this podcast, that is, I have not watched a movie with Audrey Hepburn in it yet that I can say that I didn't like. So,
it's
still good on there with some of my favorite of her movies. I'm a big fan of thrillers and mystery type movies, so I'm not going to say it's my favorite of her movies, but it's a pretty good movie.
And what surprised me actually is, though Alan Arkin is one of my favorite parts of the film, I went back and I looked through the film, and he actually doesn't have too many scenes in the film. Although he's the main driving force behind everything, he just eats up the scenery in a way that really makes his performance stand out, despite the lack of screen time.
Yeah, and I would say that's probably a good thing, that he doesn't have a lot of screen time, because, his character, what his character is, who his character is. I think if you probably put him in the movie throughout, he is probably not as terrifying, intimidating that you might want him to be. You think
he might wear it as welcome, so to speak? It's not an odd thing to say for, psychopath, but...
Yeah, because, so, it's because you don't know his next move. Mm-hmm. As the person watching the film, you are in the same boat that all the other characters are in when they interacted with him. You don't know what's going on through his brain. You don't know what his next move is going to be. For instance, the other characters in the films, the ones that are working with him, you kind of know what they want. You get where they're coming from. You get their end goals for the most part. But him, no, you don't get any of that. In fact, honestly, most of the things he did, I'm sitting there going, why did you do that? But not in I can't believe that you did that, but what motivated you to do that?
Yeah. And I think that in that sense, it keeps a certain amount of mystery about him. There's even a scene toward the end. It's not a spoiler but in the early parts of the film, he commits a murder off screen, but he hides the body in her apartment, and he refers to her later toward the end as Mrs. Rote. And it's it alludes to this background, and you're not sure what it was, but it's just enough to add a little bit of color, but not enough to destroy the mystery. And that's I think you're right about that. It's if you put him in too much, then you risk losing some of the mystery and behind his character. But ultimately, I think you really don't need to know anything about him except that he just likes doing evil. He just really enjoys it. You don't quite figure that out early on. You think there might be an actual kind of money or greed or something like that, what's more typical. But no, as the film goes on, he's nope, this guy is straight up psychopath. He likes, he and a sadist.
Yeah, that's just so much truth to that statement. And I guess this might add to, a little bit to the mystery, or, well, as you're watching the movie, it adds to the mystery of him, you realize that, like, this is not like, when we're saying sadist and we're saying things like, you know, he likes to do evil for the sake of evil, oftentimes a character like that, I wouldn't say, you know, think of, you probably can put him in the same category as the Joker.
Yeah.
And everything. And think about the Dark Knight movie, the Joker, Heath Ledger's Joker from the Dark Knight movie. For like the longest time, most of the characters in that movie that are interacting with the Joker come at him from a position of, oh, he's just doing this just to do this. And the Joker kind of even alludes to people thinking that way about him, but then you realize, no, he's not chaos for chaos sake. His chaos has order to it. That's the same way with Rote in this movie. His chaos, there's an order to his chaos. Oftentimes, again, evil people, you think, oh, they're just going to do the maximum amount of evil just for the sake of doing evil. But then you can kind of see what he's planning on doing. You can see that he's thinking a couple steps ahead of most of the characters in the movie.
Yes.
Like at all times, especially there right at the end when he's interacting with the people that he's hired to do this job for him.
It's just about, there's a certain amount of pleasure, and that's where the sadism comes in. There is a motivation. It's just one that most people would just never think of because it's just too horrific, you know. No one wants to think of someone else enjoying someone else's pain. But that's what makes it particularly horrifying, actually.
Yeah, and that's, yeah, because you're like, why are you like this?
I mean, there's a part where, you know, she's, you know, Audrey Hepburn's character, Susie is blind. And one of the great parts about her story is how she learns to actually use it as an advantage. But in the meantime, until she does, you know, Rote, especially toward the end, there's a part where he's just torturing her with a feather or something. He's just like barely touching her face just to kind of hint at his presence. And she knows he's there and she knows his intentions. And so all he's doing is just toying with her like a cat, you know, playing with a mouse before it kills it.
The one thing that always like threw me out of like disbelief for the movie, not her role, but disbelief in the movie, because, you know, sometimes every movie you have to suspend a little bit of disbelief.
Oh, yeah.
For certain things to happen. But like one of the things that kept throwing me out was like the talking between her and her husband, Mr. Hendricks. About like her going to blind school. And I'm like, is this a thing?
Well, there is actually.
It's called blind school, though?
Well, I don't know if it's called blind school. I think that the writers probably could have done a little bit of a better job. I know. Yeah,
that's my thing.
See, I grew up in New Jersey, right across the Hudson River from New York, and there's actually a local school that helps pair, at least I would imagine it's still in operation, for training dogs to help the blind. Blind school seems a little bit reductionist. Like, could you, or a little bit, seems a little bit generic, you know? He's like, I go to person school. Well, that's good for you. You know, good for you.
And maybe they don't need to do this, although it could have added some depth to, you know, what she's learning and everything, but they don't really like say exactly what she's learning in this school that she's going to. Right. And everything. And you would also think that maybe like, I don't know, this is me nitpicking, but like, you know, they have she has, I think her name is Lucy. Lucy helps her. It's a young girl that lives in that apartment complex that they live in.
I think it's,
but you would kind of think maybe with the money that her husband seems to be making, which isn't bad money, it seems like, you would think maybe there would be like more opportunities to have like a helper with her at certain times of the day besides just Lucy. But again, that's nitpicking a story, the part of the story that probably doesn't need to really be nitpicked on that much.
I think the girl's name was Gloria, I think.
Gloria. Yeah. Gloria.
When you mentioned the husband, it did make me think, I feel everything for Susie's character, but for when it comes to him, it's like his kind of way of being supportive for her. It's that kind of tough love thing. It's like, I don't know if this is the best. I don't know if this is the best approach, you know, considering the situation. Yeah. And not only that, but it's like, even when at the end, you know, obviously it's not going to be a tragedy. So it's like, yes, she survives, but when he finally is rejoined with her at the end, because they spend almost the entirety of the film apart. That's part of the tension, is that she's without anyone else for help except for this little girl. But when her husband finally comes back, and here's this mess of a place because of all the drama, and he can just stand there. He doesn't even get close to her. It's like distant much. You're like, what,
Yeah.
Come on, dude. Your wife just went through this terrible ordeal, and you're standing there kind of just staring in disbelief like you're admiring a Van Gogh or something. Like, come on, dude. A little bit bigger of a problem, though, is that you have the two other criminals who are like the con men who Rote kind of, he strong arms them into helping him with this con job, trying to get the doll with the heroin back. Whenever they're acting as themselves in character, they do a pretty good job. But whenever they have to start putting on their con job personas, in front of Susie to make her believe things that aren't true, that's when I started like, you guys are putting it on so thick right now. It's like, you could have, like, how did you guys even get by as con artists? I mean, this is pretty paper thin stuff. So, but it's a bit of a distraction, I guess I could say. It's a distraction.
Yeah. Let me ask you a question.
Sure.
Here's something different. Let's say we have the opportunity to remake this movie, and in this day and age, let's not worry about a budget or anything like that.
Okay.
But we just could remake this movie. In sitting down as a writer of this movie, do you think those two characters are needed?
It's interesting. Well, I mean, if you don't have...
Let's look at, well, I guess maybe you could say, well, with Gloria, it's needed. But let's say that, he could have just, the guy did pretty good disguises.
He did.
In the movie.
Yeah.
In fact, like when he plays an older Mr. Rote, you can almost not tell him apart from himself.
Yeah.
He can, but like, let's say like you cast someone that, you cast like a voice actor or something like that, and then you just have the one guy playing that same role the whole entire time. Could you do it? You think it could be pulled off?
Man.
Or do you think, no, the characters of Mr. Tallman or Mike Tallman
I think the characters
are needed?
I think the characters themselves are fine. I think that actually they are more important than just that, because they add a layer of complexity, at least to the moral dimension, because although they are con men, they're not without a conscience. Okay, because these guys, it's like they're not murderers. They don't want to become murderers, and so they have a line, and that line is tested. But I think between the moral conundrum it puts them in, and also because it adds an extra layer of complexity to an extra dimension, that it also gives you a chance to introduce Mr. Rote. Because without them, I mean, Mr. Rote doesn't have Mr. Rote as Mr. Rote instead of one of his personas he puts on for the con job. It would just be he doesn't have anyone to bounce off of that you would get to introduce him to get that feel for the menace that he brings. Because if he was just coming in like as his personas, he would not want to be that menacing. He would want to be more appealing, at least. It's like if you're going to pick actors who can portray con artists, make sure that they're the kind of actor that can like stretch to do multiple roles within the same role. And I can think of a number of actors who can do that even today. There's a great number of actors who can do that and do it pretty regularly. But there's others that are really like, I would not put like a Tommy Lee Jones, for example. I love to go to Tommy Lee Jones in these circumstances, because he's like the archetype for me of, he really is. He only plays different versions of himself. And it's like whenever he leaves or departs from that, it's like everything goes, the wheels come off. There's a way to read the film, I think, that actually could be, helpful for people watching today. We're not helpful so much as just kind of relevant, is that you've got these characters trying to impose a kind of like their own bubble around this woman. This is a bunch of lies and deceit. It's like an alternative reality bubble. You've heard of like new information bubbles, right? People prefer the information they like to hear over the kind they don't like to hear, and they stay in those circles. Well, in this case, it's like someone actually trying to, there's actually a force that's imparting it. But the biggest important part for me was that she trusts her relationship with her husband. When it really push comes to shove, it's her relationship with her husband, even though he's a bit of a jerk, that actually proves to be the undoing, because she doesn't believe. That's what causes the unbelief for her in not taking these lies at face value anymore. If you want to take it that way, I think there's a nice little message in there that you could take from it.
This movie's different. There was a point, Susie is our ultimate hero in this movie. And there were points in this movie that I'm sitting there going, I don't know if she's going to, are they going to do it? Are they going to cross that threshold? Again, you have to remember, this is a time period too, where that threshold's very rarely crossed.
Yeah.
Especially with a character, especially with a main character actor like Audrey Hepburn's character.
Yes.
You know what I mean? You just don't really cross those thresholds because you want to see Audrey Hepburn save the day.
Yes, you do.
And everything. But there are times in this movie that you're sitting there thinking to yourself, oh, this is very much not going in her favor at all.
No. Well, I think that does a pretty good job of our cover on Wait Until Dark. So at this time, I want to remind the listening audience that we love to have you on board and would invite you guys to go ahead and watch these films with us. At the end of every episode, we announce what next week's film is going to be. And yeah, go ahead and watch it with us and leave a comment in the section below so we can hear what you guys have to say. So our next film, guys, is The Lavender Hill Mob with Alec Guinness. So Ryan, do you have anything else to say?
Well, I don't have actual confirmation. I need to do my due diligence and actually figure things out. But I think sometimes when you go back and watch a movie like Wait Until Dark, and we've already brought up, the character of Rote, I think that we can probably see how these movies shaped modern movies. And by modern movies, modern directors, modern writers, how they might have shaped. Because Rote, again, honestly, it's a pretty good prototype to Heath Ledger's Joker, in my personal opinion. Go back and watch these movies. They're good movies. You'll have a good time watching them.
We certainly do.
Yeah, you'll learn something from them. And if you like history, this is part of history. You can see the world that they're living in at the time, and you can kind of connect dots and see oh, this is why it was written this way. This is why it was looked at in this way and everything. So I encourage you, go back and watch these movies and really study them, and you will be enriched by them.
You will be rewarded. Well, that's a great thought and sentiment to leave the folks on, Ryan. So I guess there's nothing left to do but to say bye-bye, folks, and see you next week, Ryan.
See you next week, Justin.
All right, man.